Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel and I hope that you must be doing great. So let's start with the analysis video for 4th of August 2023. So we see that government it imposes curbs on the import of laptops and tablets. So new regulations, they've been released. So according to these new regulations, it requires import licenses with immediate effect. And it is obviously, it would be impacting in short-term availability of the laptops of different brands like these. And it will be a boost for the domestic sector. And short term के लिए कुछ devices ऐसे हैं जिनको exemption दी गई है. तो बेसिकली शॉर्ट टर्म अवेलेबिलिटी पे इम्पैक्ट होगा तो शॉर्ट टर्म में प्राइसेस भी इंक्रीज हो सकते हैं एंड अगेन दिस इज ऑल इन द डायरेक्शन ऑफ आत्मनिर्भर भारत एंड बूस्टिंग द सेल्फ रिलायंस. तो इसके लिए दिस इज द न्यू रेगुलेशन जिसके अंडर इम्पोर्ट लाइसेंस होना इज इम्पोर्टेंट एंड दिस इज गोइंग टू बी एप्लीकेबल फ्रॉम इमीडिएट इफेक्ट. सो अगर हम चाइना की बात करें, कंपटीशन फ्रॉम चाइना. So financial year 2022 and 23 में India imported around somewhere we can say $9,500 million worth of laptops from China, and Hong Kong was a distant second. So these are the major players from which we've been importing laptops and tablets. So China, then Hong Kong, followed by Singapore, Taiwan, and Malaysia. So this is the decision. And मूविंग फॉरवर्ड, सो ग्रेट निकोबार प्रोजेक्ट की बात करें तो अगेन यहाँ पे environmental ethics also comes in. That becomes important from the perspective of GS4 paper. So over 9 lakh trees, they are likely to be axed for this great Nicobar project. So again जो हम बात कर रहे थे environmental ethics, तो उसमें forest dwellers, their rights, that also becomes important, उनका rehabilitation, all of that. And इसके अलावा when we talk about growth versus development, that is another dimension that you can discuss about in this context. And again, the benefits and the negatives, or you can talk in the context of profits and losses because of this single project. So obviously we can't stop with the developmental projects, so you need to think about what measures and what steps becomes important in order to make these developmental projects sustainable in nature. So that is something you can bring in the form of a constructive point. And again, you can think in a more detail about what measures would be required in order to make a project as a sustainable developmental project. So here, one thing is the strategic importance of this project. So this is another, in favor of this project, you can give this argument. So Save the Children loses its FCRA permit. So in the context of NGOs अगर हम बात करें and obviously foreign funding, तो FCRA Act बहुत important हो जाता है, Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. So the NGO which is named Save the Children, so it loses this FCRA permit, and Ministry of Home Affairs, it has withdrawn this permit. So it is a UK-based NGO, and it is a leading child rights organization that focuses on various dimensions like health, education, hunger, and vulnerable children in conflicts. So last year, it had come under the government's radar for a fundraising campaign on the malnutrition, which was objected by the Minister of Women and Child Development also, on the grounds that the issue was being vigorously pursued by the government through these schemes. So NGO was undertaking the fundraising exercise for the same purpose. So government said that government it is targeting this particular area, this particular challenge through its own scheme. So it is not important for NGOs to go ahead with the fundraising exercises, because again, when we talk about transparency and accountability of the usage of those funds, that comes under question. So Supreme Court says that, can you equate Article 370 with the basic structure or not? So that is something I can say an important question being raised by Supreme Court. And before going into this, you need to be clear with the idea of basic structure, the basic structure doctrine, what has been the important Supreme Court judgments on this, what constitutes the basic structure, and all of that. So everything around basic structure needs clarity. Coming to this question, so Supreme Court, it has asked whether this Article 370, which gave special status to Jammu and Kashmir, it is being equated with basic structure of the Constitution. And if this is upheld, so obviously abrogation of this article would come under question. Basically, obviously that wouldn't be something which would be then constitutionally valid. Agar Article 370 ko we equate it to be the basic structure of the Constitution. So status quo would be restored agar this is upheld. So that is the simple thing about it. So abrogation of this article was a purely political act, and there was nothing within the constitutional structure which empowered the president or the parliament to abrogate this article, according to Kapil Sibal. Coming to the editorial page, so let's see the important articles for today. So nuclear signaling, the need for new guardrails. So even in the context of Russia-Ukraine war, there is obviously a threat of even, escalating this war to a nuclear war. So apart from that, let's talk about in detail what this article has to offer for us. So the conflict in Ukraine and the recourse to the nuclear rhetoric, it has revived concerns about the nuclear escalation management between the major nuclear powers. So when we talk about since the end of the Cold War period, we see US-Russia nuclear rivalry. It had taken a backseat. And instead, now we are seeing North Korea, Iran, and India, Pakistan, they get attention when we talk about the nuclear weapons. So there are questions about the nuclear stability, and it is becoming clear now that in today's changed political environment, escalation management lessons of the Cold War no longer seem to work for the US and Russia. So obviously today's times and comparing the times of Cold War era, so that cannot be, we can't say that things that worked back then would be applicable or they will still hold their relevance in contemporary times as well. So since geopolitics that has changed a lot, countries they have moved forward in terms of their economic development. Accordingly, they have established their own sovereign position in the world economics or the world politics. So that's why we can say ki the things that worked before, it's not important they would be working the same way in contemporary times. So there is deterrence failure. So June 2021, US and the Russian presidents, they met in Geneva, and nuclear arms control, that was the high priority item on the agenda, but there was no significant progress, and concerns grew about the Russian troop presence in Belarus on the Ukrainian border as well. Central Intelligence Agency director, they also flew to Moscow in November to spell out the consequences of aggression. So even as NATO's leaders, they met to decide their response. We see Mr. Biden made it clear that US was determined to avoid a third world war or allowing conflict to escalate into a NATO-Russia conflict. So दिस इज अ बेसिक थिंग जहां से रशिया यूक्रेन वॉर स्टार्ट हुआ, जो रशिया के कंसर्न्स हैं अबाउट एक्सपैंडिंग नेटो मोर क्लोजर टुवर्ड्स द रशिया's बॉर्डर. So if nuclear weapons they get involved, so it might be possible this might turn out to be the third world war. But USA says it does not want this to become the third world war. And then अगर ऐसा होता है तो it would be NATO versus Russia conflict. सो रशिया के ऊपर सैंक्शंस लगाए गए बाय द यूएस एंड उनका इतना कोई मेजर इम्पैक्ट नहीं हुआ जो सोचा गया था, इंटेंडेड इम्पैक्ट नहीं हो पाया. देन वी सी दैट in Feb 2022, Mr. Putin warned that if Ukraine it attempts to take back Crimea, जो रशिया ने 2014 में ऑलरेडी एनेक्स कर लिया था, एंड यूक्रेन अब अगर कोशिश करता है ऑफ टेकिंग बैक क्रिमिया, सो यूरोपियन कंट्रीज दे विल बी इन कॉन्फ्लिक्ट विद रशिया, which is a leading nuclear power superior to many NATO countries in terms of the nuclear force. So this was a warning that was issued by Mr. Putin in 2022. So in today's changed political environment, we see escalation management lessons of the Cold War. They no longer seem to work for US and Russia. This we've talked about their relevance in contemporary times. And USA, it has also issued some blunt warnings to Russia against using tactical nuclear weapons in the first week of March. NATO also decided against a no-fly zone, and Poland, Slovakia, and Bulgaria, they announced that they would not be sending MiG aircrafts to Ukraine on account of the Russian threats against their airfields from where these aircrafts they were to take off. So Russia ने ये इस टाइप की warnings भी issue करी थी. Basically, countries indirectly they're supporting Ukraine. So kind of we can say proxy war is going on. So they are, supporting Ukraine in terms of making available arms and ammunition. So few countries they backed out after Russia's warning. And Cold War lessons की अगर हम बात करें, so deterrence it is fundamentally based on assumption that both the adversaries they are rational enough to judge. I would repeat, adversaries are rational enough to judge when costs outweigh the benefits of the act. So very important statement. So nuclear deterrence it adds a conundrum also. अगर आप ये argument देते हो कि for the nuclear deterrence being nuclear power or having the nuclear weapons is important, तो उसकी वजह से कुछ problems भी emerge out होती हैं. So with huge arsenals that provided for assured second strike capability, neither the US nor the Soviet Union it had an incentive to try a surprise first strike. So even अगर हम इंडिया पाकिस्तान की बात करें तो we see right now current situation में Pakistan is going through political and economic instability. So again उसकी वजह से जो nuclear power की threat है या attack है उसकी frequency या उसकी we can say forecast and expectations और ज़्यादा increase हो जाती है. तो जैसे कि यहाँ पे बोला गया rational enough to judge, इतनी capability होनी चाहिए किसी particular nuclear power के अंदर to outweigh, to basically have that understanding या balance out करना कि कब cost it outweighs the benefits of your action या कोई intended act जो आप आगने वाले टाइम में करना चाहते हो, तो क्या कॉस्ट है, क्या उसके बेनिफिट्स हो सकते हैं. इतनी सिंप्लिसिटी से, इतनी क्लैरिटी से कंट्री में इतना डिसीजन मेकिंग, रैशनल डिसीजन मेकिंग पावर होनी चाहिए. तो इस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में वी कैन से कि कहीं ना कहीं पाकिस्तान से करंट इकोनॉमिक पॉलिटिकल अनस्टेबिलिटी के अंदर ये थ्रेट थोड़ी कहीं ना कहीं इंक्रीज हो जाती है. So you can see 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis was also mentioned over here. तो इस एपिसोड के बारे में आप थोड़ा रीड कर सकते हो. Then probing for the red lines. So you can say what are the dangers. So Russia's nuclear doctrine issued on June 2, 2020 specifies two conditions under which Russia it would use the nuclear weapon. So दो conditions mention की गई हैं जो रशिया की न्यूक्लियर डॉक्ट्रिन इशू की गई इन 2020. So two conditions जहाँ पे रशिया न्यूक्लियर weapons यूज कर सकता है in response to the use of nuclear weapons and other types of weapons of mass destruction against it, and in case of aggression against the Russian Federation with the use of conventional weapons when the very existence of the state is put under threat. So ये दो conditions हैं अगर ऐसी कोई सिचुएशन इमर्ज आउट होती है तो चाइना कैन यूज द न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स. Second, there is often cited escalate to de-escalate approach. So it implies using tactical nuclear weapons to overcome stalemate on the battlefield and thus forcing termination of the hostilities on favorable terms. So 2022 May, this was rejected by USA, declaring that the first use it would not lead to de-escalation on Russian terms. मतलब ऑब्वियसली अगर हम स्ट्रैटेजी की बात करें, इस अप्रोच की बात करें, एस्केलेट टू डी एस्केलेट, तो इट डज नॉट साउंड लॉजिकल कि अगर एक बार न्यूक्लियर वेपन यूज किया गया तो उसके बाद जो हॉस्टिलिटीज हैं दे कैन कम टू एन एंड. इट इज पॉसिबल कि चीजें और ज्यादा आगे एस्केलेट हो जाएं. So path-breaking studies, we see that economics, maybe go by the studies, it has showed that humans, they often tend to double down on the bad bets because of loss aversion. So Cold War escalation management lessons, they apply to a different world today. US and Russia, they no longer enjoy parity, and Russia's red lines, they are fuzzy. So nuclear signaling today, it is taking place in uncharted political territory. New guardrails, they are necessary if nuclear taboo has to be preserved. So these are some of the nuances that we discussed about. And similarly, you need to think in very simple terms, even about the other GS topics, even in your answers, that needs to clearly reflect as well. So healthcare sector की बात करें, specifically talking about the pharma sector. So we need evidence-based, ethics-driven medicine. So ethics वाला जो component या dimension है, it is almost applicable in each and every topic. So that is specifically very important in current times as well. So talking about this, the recent push to integrate Ayush medicinal systems into the mainstream healthcare to achieve the universal health coverage and decolonize the medicine. That is a pluralistic approach that would require every participating system to meet basic safety and efficacy standards. So this is one thing. यहाँ पे बहुत सारे कीवर्ड्स यूज किए गए हैं. आयुष को इंटीग्रेट करने की कोशिश की जा रही है विद द करंट हेल्थ केयर सिस्टम इन ऑर्डर टू अचीव यूनिवर्सल हेल्थ कवरेज. एंड an important keyword is decolonize the medicine. So it becomes important कि we have a wider participation in it, and also it's important to have the basic safety and efficacy standards in place. So homeopathy does not meet these standards, but its supporters, they argue that it is used by citing demand and decolonization, disregarding its flaws. So efficacy and safety of homeopathy के बारे में यहाँ बात की गई है, although हम इतना डिटेल में नहीं जाएंगे. So argument to reject the homeopathy is not just based on its coloniality, but chiefly on the lack of evidence for efficacy. So standards की यहाँ बात की गई है. So you need to think more in terms of what are the ethical elements that needs to be made a part of the pharma sector. So coups in Niger and इसके पीछे causes क्या हैं, and right now what are the concerns related to it. So although इस topic को हम पहले discuss कर चुके हैं in detail, so we had a look at the location of Niger as well, and it is basically majorly talking about क्या causes रहे, क्या concerns हैं. So how has the military justified the ousting of the president Bazoum? So military, it has blamed worsening of insecurity and economic crisis for behind this military coup in Niger. And despite the presence of US and the French troops, Niger, it was unable to address the insurgency situation that was worsening. So US and French troops, they are present in the country, and uske baad bhi the situation when we talk about controlling the insurgency situation, वो इतना successfully नहीं possible हो पाया. So groups which are linked to Al Qaeda, the Islamic State, and Boko Haram, they operate in the southwest near the Malian and the southeast near the Nigerian borders. So they're still operating. And according to the Global Terrorism Index of this year as well, around 200 people have died in the insurgent attacks in 2022. So Nigeria, it is holding the 6th highest civilian death toll. And then economic situation की बात करें तो there is high inflation, there is corruption, food insecurity is there. So that is the main reason behind this military coup. And global response क्या रहा? So UN की अगर बात करें, US, Germany, France, they have condemned it. UN, it has suspended humanitarian operations in Niger, while the European Union, it has also halted all the security cooperation in the country. So USA has announced unflagging support for Mr. Bazoum, calling for his immediate release. So erstwhile जो president थे, USA is supporting him, and France has called for an immediate reinstatation of the constitutional order and democratically elected civilian government following an attack on the French embassy in Niger. So Emmanuel Macron said that any attacks on the France's interest in Niger, they would not be tolerated. France would take swift and uncompromising actions. So the countries are supporting the ousted president, and external interest kya hai ab in the country. So insurgency in Mali, Burkina Faso, they led to the military coups. Niger, it managed the democratic transfer of power 2021 May, and this had kept smooth relations with the West because of the democracy working there in the country. But it has been also it has been a key partner in Washington's fight against insurgency. So this we have seen, and different measures were undertaken for this. French troops are also present. They're also fighting insurgency in the country, and it is rich in uranium, which produces 7% of the global supplies, and it has been exporting quarter of it to France. So this is basically the main interest of the third world, or basically third world in the sense the third parties that are involved in Nigeria. Basically, अगर हम USA and French के troops presence की बात करें तो ठीक है, they are there to fight insurgency, but in return उनका भी कुछ definitely interest and फायदा होगा, then only they are involved and present there. So the important thing is the minerals which are found in Niger. One of them is uranium, which is very important. So according to Euratom, Niger, it supplies around 25% of uranium to the European Union countries as well. And Russia is also involved there. So regional response is divided. And this we'll see in US and France supporting the ousted president. Then anti-French sentiments are also rising in Niger. So following this coup, thousands, they took part in protests in the capital because ऐसा कोई successful result नहीं निकल के आया है despite the presence of US and French troops in terms of reduced incidences of insurgency in the country. So that's why anti-French sentiments are also rising alongside. So why are there several coups in Niger? So since independence 1960 से अगर हम बात करें, so it experienced 4 military coups and several were attempted. So latest attempt, it was in 2021, जब military group tried to take over the presidential palace, and all the coups, they were attributed to frustrations, incompetent authorities, the failure to stem the insecurity in the Sahel region, economic and humanitarian crisis that followed. So these are some of the reasons, and for the military also, crisis and the popular discontent, it is an advantage to capturing power. So obviously everybody wants to come into power and be at helm. So ऐसे situations के अंदर they basically misuse them, and it becomes an opportunity for them to carry out one of the successful military coups. So biological diversity bill क्या है, why it is facing opposition. So how does this act's implementation raises the concerns? क्या basically concerns हैं? Industry का क्या view है? And Environment Ministry की क्या priorities हैं? So let's understand them by understanding the provisions of this proposed bill. So सबसे पहले, why this bill is being considered problematic? So this bill, it is exempting the codified traditional knowledge and Ayush industry from benefit sharing, denying the local communities the benefits from accessing the biological resources. So this is a form of differentiation, we can say, and this is one concern. Apart from this, experts regard this exemption as regressive because the reason why the legislation was enacted in the first place was to ensure fair and equitable sharing of benefits. So ये तो main purpose था behind proposing this bill. And bill के अंदर ही we are seeing there is one provision which is again talking about discrimination, yeah, the provision which would not result into fair and equitable sharing the benefits to the Ayush industry or the codified traditional knowledge-based industry. So what has been the extent to which this act has been implemented? So it is important to bear in mind that proposed relaxations, they come at a time when the act, it hasn't even been implemented at full. मतलब जो पहले वाली जो act है, this is basically talking about recent जो amendment bill अभी propose किया गया है, but इससे पहले जो proper act को pass किया गया था, law बनाया गया था, अभी तक वो ही fully implement नहीं हो पाई है, and we are getting into amending it. So 2022 investigation by the Center for Science and Environment, it has showed that in many states, there were no data available on what is the amount of money that is received from companies and traders for the access and benefit sharing. And one of the 2016 studies by legal researchers, they also show that many difficulties have cropped up in many states when we're talking about implementing these provisions of this act, especially those which are related to access and benefit sharing. So industry का क्या viewpoint है या क्या stand है? Industry, it has been unhappy with the regulations and it has run to courts and sought relaxation as well. So 2016 का एक case है, Uttarakhand Biodiversity Board, it sent a notice to Divya Pharmacy, and which is a part of Baba Ramdev's Patanjali Yogpeeth Trust. So it stated कि जो company है, it was in violation of this act for using biological resources without prior intimidation to the board. So जो उत्तराखंड का बायोडाइवर्सिटी बोर्ड है, उसको पहले आपको इन्फॉर्म करना इम्पोर्टेंट है या परमिशन लेना इम्पोर्टेंट है if you want to use any biological resources. So this was not done or this was violated by the Divya Pharmacy, and company challenged this notice in Uttarakhand High Court, although it ultimately lost this case. Then another case is 2015 representatives from Gujarat's Ayurveda ministry. They have urged central government to provide some relief to the sector by postponing the implementation of access and benefit sharing provisions. And Statement of objections and reasons section of this bill clearly states that concerns were raised by stakeholders representing Indian system of medicine sector, seed sector, industry sector, research sector, urging to simplify, streamline, and reduce the compliance burden so as to encourage a conducive environment. So यहाँ basically और क्या करना चाहिए in this bill. And again, जब हम इंडियन मेडिकल सेक्टर की बात कर रहे हैं, स्पेसिफिकली इंडियन बेस्ड नॉलेज सिस्टम की बात करते हैं, तो इन करंट टाइम्स द सिचुएशन और इवन द हेल्थ इश्यूज दैट वी आर डीलिंग विद, वहां पे वी सी की जो इम्पोर्टेंस है या जो वी सी द रिजल्ट्स ऑफ द इंडियाज ट्रेडिशनल मेडिकल नॉलेज, वो बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट है. तो अगेन we can't push it back. We need to see it equally with the modern medical system that we have. So there will be BRICS summit in South Africa this month. So Indian Prime Minister, he would be also attending it. So again, what is important would be the outcome of it. So talking about the success of the project Cheetah, so we are seeing experts, they go back on the letter raising concerns over the cheetah deaths. So yesterday we lost one more cheetah. So following a letter which was sent by the South African wildlife veterans and the cheetah experts to Supreme Court expressing serious concerns over the management of this project, two of them, they have asked that their names be withdrawn on the grounds that it could impede the future exports of animals from Africa to India. So यहाँ पे भी you can see again transparency, accountability वाली चीज आ जाती है, and transparency in terms of information sharing, what is the status update. So that was basically, these are the concerns that have been raised or they've been alleged by the experts or environmental experts from South Africa. So CJ on Article 370, he says, but is it not possible that such a compact, it could be overridden by the sovereign of the succeeding state, that is government of India? So Kapil Sibal, he argued that Article 370 was a compact which was entered into between the two sovereigns. So to this was the reply of CGI. So hearing in Article 370 case, it continued before the Constitution bench. And हमने basic structure के context में already बात कर ली है. Here it is mentioned. So we know कि after independence, we did not take over the Jammu and Kashmir, and things went differently. So again यहाँ पे आपको जो historical incidences ये जो events हुए वो भी पता होना चाहिए, how basically Article 370 it came into force and what were the reasons behind that. So what makes it unique, all of that is important. So data protection bill has been tabled. हमारे लिए important इसका critical analysis है, and few features they are mentioned over here. You can go through them. We have already done the critical analysis in previous video, so you can go through that. And if you have missed that, so you can just go through this article once, or you can revisit that video as well. So talking about the endangered Himalayan vulture, so that was bred in captivity for the first time in India, and it was successful as well. So the vulture is nesting at the Assam State Zoo in Guwahati. So researchers, they have recorded the first instance of captive breeding of the Himalayan vulture in Assam, and it is categorized as near threatened. So this is the IUCN status. Again, you can find out about what are the other species of vulture which are found in India. And it is a common winter migrant to the Indian plains, Himalayan vulture. And again, you can then also find out about if there are, dedicated vulture national parks in India or not. And obviously their locations also becomes important. Coming to the world page. So here we see, so Poland and Lithuania, they say that they fear provocations from Russia and Belarus. So Wagner group का role भी बहुत important है, and Poland, Lithuania की आपको location पता होना important है. They're basically distance from Ukraine or Russia. You can just try to understand the whole situation through the map. So Pakistan has approved signing of security pact with the US. So CIS MOA, it is the foundational agreement that US signs with its allies and countries with which it wants to maintain close military ties. So it in a way provides legal cover for the sale of military equipments. So from the perspective of India, you can basically think about कि इंडिया के ऊपर what is going to be the potential impact या हो सकता है in future. So from the perspective of defense security, थोड़ी चीजें और ज़्यादा difficult हो सकती है. So it might lead to increasing the defense expenditure as well. So that's the update. Business page पे we are seeing services PMI hits 13-year high. We're talking about 13 years of high. Record has been made in the month of July in case of services PMI, and this is lifted by export surge. So services sector में जो हमारा exports है, that is one of the, I can say, strategic areas for India. It is very, very important for our economic growth. And services sector output rebounded from June's 3-month low to fastest since June 2010. It was buoyed because of strong demand थी market में for the services, and there were new business gains alongside. साथ ही साथ अगर आप देखोगे कि रिकॉर्ड तो हमने बनाया ही, बट इनपुट कॉस्ट भी इंक्रीज हुई है द फास्टेस्ट पेस इन 13 months. दैट वाज बिकॉज ऑफ फूड, लेबर एंड ट्रांसपोर्टेशन. तो गिवन ऑल दिस, still we could make a 13-year high. So Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and UAE, these are some of the emerging partners or key sources of export order. Basically, in countries say we are having maximum amount of orders या services orders या exports, जिसकी वजह से हमारी demand जो है इन countries में high है. But जो pace of job creation है, that remains slight and it is on par with the previous 2 months only. So government remains guarded over the prices even as जो core inflation है वो थोड़ी soften हुई है, मतलब थोड़ी reduce हुई है in Q1. So core inflation का soften होना ठीक है, important है, but जब आप headline inflation की भी बात करते हो जिसमें food and fuel inflation are a component of it and directly उसका impact consumer sentiment पे भी होता है, तो having an equal eye and vigil upon the performance of the headline inflation भी important हो जाता है. So Zomato, it post first ever profit earlier than expected. So Zomato की जो shares हैं, they are also booming. And can move to the next newspaper. Mint newspaper में the data protection bill 5 takeaways के बारे में अब बात की जा रही है. Although हम इसको critically analyze already कर चुके हैं, but we'll just quickly go through it. Does this bill protect our personal data or not? So to a certain extent, yes. So firms for scrapping data from social media, they can only take the data that has been posted by the user themselves. So वही data वो ले सकते हैं. Data is posted by a third person. However, firms, they will need to obtain the permission for scrapping that particular data. This is there, and but it also restricts the storage and processing of the personal user data and beyond what a user explicitly gave the consent for. So consent was important, and this can significantly complicate the consent taking procedure that most companies follow right now. So while it does permit personal data usage, it also limits it at the same time. So क्या government and firms, are they exempted? So yes, they are exempted, and this point is expected to be debated in the coming days. कि governments or जो basically public sector firms हैं, they are exempted from this thing. So basically, they can in a way use the personal data of the people. So companies, experts, on companies, experts, they said that this bill, it lacks any review mechanism or appeal process for the tech firms if the central government orders them addressed as significant data fiduciaries. And so अगर कोई complaint की जाती है तो what would happen then? So telecom dispute settlement and appellate tribunal है under the data protection board, so it will be handling the grievances, and this has raised questions again. So question If the body it has expertise to assess and gauge the impact of the breach in consent, and again इसकी autonomy होना भी then becomes important. So data transfer के लिए what is going to be the approach? So previous जो draft थे it had suggested whitelisting approach. So government it could name which nations they would be eligible to host Indian users data. So this is basically what do we mean by whitelisting approach कि government ही बताएगी कौन से ऐसे nations हैं which are eligible to host Indian users data. So जो भी current bill है it proposes government it may instead restrict personal data transfers to select nations, thereby taking a blacklisting approach. मतलब white listing में ये था कि कौन सी countries personal data hold कर सकती है, black listing में government would just tell कौन सी ऐसी countries हैं जो नहीं host कर सकती हैं. तो बाकी सारी countries जो बच गई जो blacklist का part नहीं होंगे they can host that data. So it could allow the government to limit the data transfer to nations which are based on India's geopolitical equations. Although अभी obviously इसकी कोई भी defined discrete list नहीं आई है. So bilateral ties पे कुछ negative repercussions हो सकते हैं for India because we'll be going ahead with the blacklisting approach. So child safety is another important question. So under section 9 on processing the personal data of children, the age at which users they are determined as children, it is not held constant at 18. So एक ही important provision है कि below 18, above 18 वाला criteria नहीं use किया जाएगा. Yeah, this would not be something which would be fixed and defined. जब आप बात कर रहे हो कि child किसको consider किया जाएगा according to this bill. So companies, they may process personal data of children if it is done in a manner that is verifiably safe hai, and it could be important since the bill does not take into account modern day internet usage by the children. So definition of verifiably safe data processing is up for debate. मतलब क्या आप इसको कैसे define करोगे and उसमें कुछ ambiguous नहीं होना चाहिए. Quote of the day is in a world facing many challenges, we must find effective ways with great understanding among the people of different cultures and beliefs. So how different cultures and beliefs can even, help in tackling these challenges. Coming to Financial Express data, so import curbs on PCs and laptops हम देख चुके हैं. Big tech firms जो हैं they face the checks on monetization of data. So here again talking about the data privacy and safety. The checks and balances on these big tech firms becomes important because the power or the base that they have in the market. So digital platforms, they will have to delete all the past user data. So firms, they need to spell out क्या purpose है and क्या usage रहने वाला है, and users उनके पास right रहेगी to seek the deletion once services deliver होने के बाद users they can ask for deleting their data also. And startups को कुछ relaxations दी जाएंगी. Content or platforms they can be blocked for continuous breach. अगर notice किया गया, report की गई, तो platforms को block भी किया जा सकता है. And fine, they can be fined up to rupees 250 crore rupees. So exemptions की अगर हम बात करें, agencies which are dealing with security matters, law and order, they are exempt. Courts and tribunals, if personal data is required for the probe also and detection of the crime, so they are exempted. Cases of merger and acquisition of companies, they are exempted. Personal financial information that can be accessed in cases of default in the payment of loans. So ये कुछ exemptions हैं. Services PMI की हम बात करें तो this we have already taken up. Graph में you can see such a sharp jump that we have seen. Countries हमने देखी जहाँ से major demand आई. Zomato shares, as I was saying, they are booming. 86 पे they have reached, and today it has even crossed this level. Focus on manufacturing. This is going to be one of the potential areas for growth for India. So Indian economy in real terms, it needs to grow annually at 7 to 7.5% until 2030. So share of manufacturing total gross value added may it has increased from 16% to at least 25% of the GDP at the expense of agriculture and low value added services. But still it needs to grow more, and जो contribution है of agriculture basically in terms of productivity अगर हम बात करें that needs to improve. So electric vehicles के लिए भी अगर हम payment security systems की बात करें तो this is also going to play an important role क्योंकि given the dependence upon the technology and their high usage, so again chances of fraud increase हो जाते हैं, तो payment security systems they become important. अगेन यहाँ पे डेटा बिल के बारे में बात की जा रही है, इंडस्ट्री की क्या कंसर्न्स है. सो द बिल इट एड्रेसेस देयर कंसर्न्स. सो 4 ऐसे क्लॉजेस हैं दैट हैव बीन फ्लैग्ड इन द ओरिजिनल जो ड्राफ्ट था, दे हैव बीन ड्रॉप्ड. सो मिडिल पार्ट यहाँ पे कंपैरिजन कर रखा है जो पुराना ड्राफ्ट था और जो भी करंट ड्राफ्ट है उसमें क्या चेंजेस किए गए. सो पूरा डेटा बिल के अराउंड ही यहाँ पे बात की जा रही है. Taking up Indian Express newspaper now, so let's see the important topics from here, the ones that we have not taken up so far. So Supreme Court, it asks whether Article 370 is in a category which is beyond Parliament's power to amend it or not. And then basic structure. क्या Article 370 को हम बोल सकते हैं it is a part of the basic structure or not? So कुछ questions हैं. We'll be taking this up in detail when we have a proper dedicated article over this topic. So Rajasthan tourism की बात करें, you can see this picture of flamingos from Banswara. And again wetlands के बारे में आप सर्च कर सकते हो राजस्थान में जो मिलते हैं. डेजर्ट जैसलमेर की पिक्चर है, दिस इज सवाई माधोपुर से जोगी महल. सो इसके बारे में आप थोड़ा और फाइंड आउट कर सकते हैं. सो टूरिज्म डेफिनेटली इम्पोर्टेंट पार्ट है राजस्थान की इकोनॉमी का. So as government expands, liberty contracts. So essay topics, they're often asked in the essay paper. So you need to basically, you can just do the brainstorming exercise. It's not important to write the complete essay, but brainstorming becomes important over these topics. Such kind of like quotes they are asked in the examination. So seeing communal rights जो गुड़गांव में हुए, it happened in Gurgaon and Haryana also Noor district में. So enmeshed in ways of past through means of present, Gurgaon offers conditions for religious vigilantism. So regional diversity of population that lives within the city's new residential localities जो हैं जिनको बोलते हैं the so-called gated communities is simultaneously characterized by a remarkable religious homogeneity also. So for a city that is built out of the ebbs and flows of so many global flows, new white collar migrants to the city, they have established a remarkably local version of Indian life. Religious life of the gated communities is almost exclusively characterized by the symbols, celebrations of just one religion. And this is very true. It's not surprising then that those who live within them increasingly they experience little of the religious diversity that actually exists outside their gates and indeed view it as an aberration rather than the norm. So we can say sadly Gurugram it may be an example of how city making and urbanity they are not necessarily connected. Malab, what is your idea of city making and the urbanity? Urbanity से आप क्या समझते हो? And how they can be connected? However, this is not so in case of Gurugram city. So it is just a collection of buildings and governance processes, whereas urbanity is a particular attitude hota hai. So talking about the attitude. So it includes a belief and education in the arts of coexistence and fair play. So that is absent. So, how Jan Vishwas bill proposes to deal with the substandard drugs. So, quality of drugs. आज ही हमने इस टॉपिक के बारे में बात की है. So, Jan Vishwas Amendment Bill 2022, it aimed at improving ease of doing business. This was passed in Rajya Sabha, so it amends around 42 laws across multiple sectors like environment, agriculture, media, publication. So, यहाँ पे amendments की बात की जा रही है. So bill क्या amendments के बारे में बात करता है? So it talks about two changes to the Drugs and Cosmetics Act. First is that it wishes to do away with the imprisonment under the Section 30 of the current law for the companies who are repeatedly using the government analysis of the test reports for promoting their products. So right now there is the punishment of 2 years and fine of not less than rupees 10,000 for a repeat violation. So it will change to only a fine but not less than rupees 5 lakhs. So एक ही amendment है. Second amendment है, the one that has attracted scrutiny is change section 32B of existing law to allow the compounding of offences under section 27. So compounding एक legal provision है that allows one to pay a fine instead of undergoing the criminal proceedings. So कहीं ना कहीं we can say dilution of this act की बात की जा रही है through this amendments. And obviously this is something we do not want exactly, we want the opposite of it. So because obviously quality of the drugs, if that is coming under concern, तो कहीं ना कहीं जो demand है, future demand है exports पे, obviously negative impact ही बढ़ेगा. तो आप act को और strict बनाने की जगह और practical बनाने की जगह you are diluting it. So manufacturers के लिए obviously that's a good news कि compounding से they'll just have to pay the fine. Criminal proceedings nahi, they'll not have to undergo that. So again, you can see it prevents the companies from being stuck in the litigation for years over minor offenses. But again, you can't then compromise with the quality of drugs as well because it's about somebody's life. Nuclear weapons in India की अगर हम बात करें, so being a nuclear power, it has given strength and autonomy to India's strategic decision making today, and it has the leverage and the moral stature to take the lead in working with international community to reduce the risk of use of these nuclear weapons. something to which India's leaders have always been committed to. So this has been always visible. Nuclear chain की बात करें, Oppenheimer believed that the atomic bomb, once it had revealed its terrifying power, it would end all the wars of the future. So a scene in the film, it captures the eminent physicist moment in which, after the success of the Trinity test, he continues to believe scientists they would have control over the weapon. Talking in this context, so जो atomic bombing हुई जापान में 1945 में, it was followed immediately afterward by the nuclear arms race between US and USSR, which defined the decades of the Cold War as well. So कोल्ड वॉर के बारे में हम ये ऑलरेडी बात कर चुके हैं, इंडिया पाकिस्तान की बात कर चुके हैं. इंडिया की स्टोरी, इंडिया की न्यूक्लियर स्टोरी की बात करें, अर्ली ईयर्स में, इन द इयर्स आफ्टर इंडिपेंडेंस, प्राइम मिनिस्टर जवाहरलाल नेहरू ही फॉलोड अ डुअल इंटेंट स्ट्रैटेजी ऑन न्यूक्लियर पावर. So he made it very clear 1950s में that he was against an atom bomb, and he called for the call for a nuclear free world. It must come from a position of strength and not weakness. So the Nehru, he entrusted Dr. Homi Bhabha with leading India's nuclear program to develop the capability to use nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, but to retain the capacity to develop the weapon if the need arose. मतलब we would be obviously adhering to the peaceful purpose, but इतनी हमारे पास like capability तो होनी चाहिए कि अगर need पड़े, अगर जरूरत पड़े future में making a nuclear weapon, तो वो हम कर सकें. So because of this, जो external environment था इंडिया के लिए थोड़ा और challenging हो गया, and specifically after the defeat of China, when China defeated India in 1962. So after 2 years, 1964 में China tested a nuclear weapon. By this time, all जो permanent members थे United Nations Security Council के, they had tested nuclear weapons. So here we have the years as well. So in this book of India's nuclear bomb, the impact on global proliferation, the author wrote that Bhabha was consciously developing nuclear weapon capabilities prior to the emergence of even the Chinese nuclear threat. So before that, he was involved into all this. So initial intent हमारा ये था to have that capacity and capability in order to develop a nuclear weapon, and obviously we always stuck to the peaceful purposes of the nuclear weapon. So from talking about the future years from the prime ministers of Indira Gandhi and Vajpayee, so India's first nuclear test किया गया 1974 में when Indira Gandhi was the prime minister. So it demonstrated the capability to produce the nuclear weapons, but जो international opposition हमें देखने को मिला, it led to slowing of the process to build and deploy the full nuclear arsenal. तो कहीं ना कहीं थोड़ा कॉन्फिडेंशियल तरीके से और सीक्रेटिव मैनर में we did the second test. So 1985 में Reagan, he told Rajiv Gandhi that Pakistan has already made a bomb, and Rajiv Gandhi, he started talking about disarmament. US president cut him short and said, don't talk theory, think of your own protection. So this was the reply given to him. So उस टाइम पे फिर से न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स की बात होने लग गई इंडिया में, and so 1998 में under the prime ministership of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, we saw the nuclear test, and it was code named as Operation Shakti. जो 1974 में हुआ, it was code named as Smiling Buddha. This was Operation Shakti. So this was the beginning of a rise of a strong and self-confident India. So जो टेस्ट किए गए, न्यूक्लियर टेस्ट किए गए, that were response to the threat which was posed by Beijing, And this was what the Indian Prime Minister told to Bill Clinton. Threat from Beijing, China. So we have an overt nuclear weapon state on our borders, a state which committed armed aggression against India in 1962. Although our relations with that country have improved in the last decade or so, an atmosphere of distrust that persists, mainly due to the unresolved border problem. So these were the exact words what were written by Atal Bihari Vajpayee. So present and future की बात करें, following this Pokhran 2 test, the Indian leadership, they exploited the political utility of its action, and these tests, it once again attracted international criticism. फिर से India को face करना पड़ा. So talks between Jaswant Sinha and Straub Tabord laid the foundation for the next steps in India-US strategic partnership, and it led to the Indo-US nuclear deal. So this was one of the, we can say, watershed moments between India and US relationship. So India's nuclear weapons, they have so far served well the purpose of deterrent. And ahead of the G7 summit in Hiroshima this May, the Japanese Prime Minister, he spoke of his desire to use meeting to send out a strong message about the need for a world without nuclear weapons. So जब हम disarmament की बात करते हैं, तो obviously it is not just applicable to developing world, but even the developed countries, that needs to go simultaneously. ऐसा एक mechanism structure होना चाहिए कि the countries, they have trust in that. So story of Voyager is mentioned, humanity's farthest foray into space. So it was launched in 1977. Voyager missions, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, they sent the first two human-made objects to interstellar space outside the impact of our sun's constant flow of material and magnetic field. So obviously it's a program by NASA. So Voyager probes, they were sent to explore the planets of Jupiter and Saturn. And in 1974, it was Uranus and Neptune. They were added to the mission's ambit. डेटा प्रोटेक्शन के बिल के बारे में आज काफी चर्चा ऑलरेडी हो चुकी है. न्यू वरी, could the data protection bill weaken the RTI Act? ये हम again critical analysis में ये वाला point already ले चुके हैं. Section 8 of the RTI Act. So इसको amend करने की basically ये bill बात कर रहा है. Currently this particular section, it prevents public authority from sharing anyone's personal information on two main grounds. That disclosure, it will have no bearing on any public activity. That revealing such information, it would cause unwarranted invasion of the privacy of the individual. So जो भी bill table किया गया है, data protection bill, it proposes that जो personal information है public officials, they will not be disclosed under the RTI Act. मतलब complete exemption की बात की जा रही है. And दो ऐसे grounds mention किए गए हैं कि it can be disclosed provided it serves larger public interest. It has been recommended to do away with. मतलब again कि किसी भी cost पे किसी भी कोई ऐसा reasonable restriction नहीं है कि exemption नहीं है under which the personal information of public officials can be disclosed under the RTI Act Section 8. So that is a concern. So according to finance minister's report, Indian economy के जो domestic dynamics हैं, they continue to be strong. अब इसमें आप किस चीज के बारे में बात कर सकते हो? Indian economy's domestic dynamics, they continue to be strong, though जो negative cross-border spillovers हैं, adverse global developments हैं, we are, going through them as well. But we point out that inflation, it has significantly declined. Vegetable, fruit, pulses prices, weather and seasonality की वजह से we are seeing high food inflation. So inflation के terms में we are managing it nicely. Monsoon so far has been good, but it is expected कि second half में we might be seeing less rain. And that's there. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for joining us in this session, and do subscribe to the channel, and also do not forget to hit the like button for this video.